"You're okay, Mommy," the 6-year-old boy whispered. Liam pressed the round plastic piece of the toy stethoscope hard against Regina's chest, holding his breath as he listened intensely for a heartbeat. He didn't blink. He didn't look away from her face. Arthur Scott stood entirely frozen in the doorway, his fingers gripping the brass knob so tightly that the metal dug into his calloused palm. His breath hitched in his throat. His blood ran cold, then turned to pure fire. His 6-year-old son, Liam, who had lived in an absolute, impenetrable stone wall of silence for 2 unbroken years, had just spoken his very first words. Not to his father, not to a high-priced neurological specialist. He was speaking to Regina Wilson, the quiet, unassuming housekeeper Arthur had hired just 2 weeks ago to mop the floors and dust the baseboards. On the hardwood floor beside them sat a bright red cleaning bucket, its soapy water perfectly still. Regina lay flat on her back on the rug, her yellow rubber gloves pulled high up her forearms, completely motionless as the boy traced the plastic stethoscope across her chest. Arthur felt the entire room tilt beneath his leather shoes. His throat went dry as dust. "Mommy." The word tore through the silent mansion like a physical blow, breaking a vault of grief that had been locked shut since the day the ambulance sirens carried his wife away. A single, bitter tear cut a hot path down the billionaire's cheek. He felt an intense, suffocating mix of profound relief, shocking grief, and an immediate, dark stab of jealousy. This story does not begin in a corporate boardroom or on a luxury private jet. It begins right here, on a living room rug, where a multi-billion-dollar empire is completely brought to its knees by a single word from a child. If you have ever waited in the dark for a breakthrough, if you have ever felt like your prayers were hitting a ceiling of absolute stone, stay right here. Subscribe to Profound Tales. Like this video. Leave a comment telling us exactly where you are watching from. Not just your geographic location, but where you're standing emotionally today. Because sometimes, the most profound miracles don't arrive with a thunderclap. They enter through the back door in the hands of a stranger everyone ignored. Arthur stood in the deep shadow of the doorframe, his chest heaving as he watched the maid hum a low, ancient melody. He was entirely powerless. He was completely undone. The silence inside the Scott estate was not an absence of sound. It was a physical weight. It sat in the high corners of the vaulted ceilings. It wrapped itself around the massive marble pillars of the grand foyer. It settled deep into the cushions of the empty leather chairs in the library. Every footstep echoed sharply against the cold limestone floors, a constant, rhythmic reminder of the vacancy that defined the billionaire's life. 2 years prior, the world had ended in a blur of wet asphalt and flashing emergency lights. The vehicle accident had been violent, sudden, and definitive. Julia was gone before the rescue teams could cut through the steel framework of the car. Liam, just 4 years old at the time, had been standing at the kitchen threshold when the notification arrived. He had watched the bright red emergency lights reflect off the glass cabinets. He had listened to the frantic, muffled telephone calls. From that exact hour, he pulled the shutters down on his soul. He stopped speaking. He stopped making sounds. He stopped acknowledging the existence of the human beings moving around him. Arthur Scott was a man who conquered markets. He built global digital infrastructures that handled millions of simultaneous processes without a microsecond of latency. His entire psychological framework was rooted in immediate, aggressive problem-solving. When his son stopped speaking, Arthur treated the crisis like a broken corporate division. He mobilized his immense wealth like a private army. First came Dr. Vance Harrington, the nation's leading pediatric neuropsychologist. He arrived at the estate with a team of 2 clinical assistants for aluminum cases of specialized diagnostic gear and a collection of high-contrast digital tablets designed to stimulate nonverbal children. Dr. Harrington spent 4 continuous hours inside the third-floor playroom. He adjusted the lighting. He offered colorful biometric blocks. He utilized auditory tracking tools. Liam remained completely unresponsive. The boy sat in the exact center of a gray wool rug, his back turned to the medical team, his small arms wrapped tightly around a faded, worn stuffed monkey that was missing its left ear. He rocked back and forth with a slow, mechanical cadence, his eyes fixed entirely on a single knot in the pine floorboards. Dr. Harrington eventually emerged from the room, his tie loosened, his forehead slick with sweat. He shook his head slowly as he packed his leather cases. The emotional trauma has caused a profound structural regression, Mr. Scott, the doctor stated, his voice clinical and detached. The brain has actively severed its communicative pathways as a defense mechanism. We could try heavy behavior modification drugs, but the prognosis is exceptionally poor. You must prepare yourself for the reality that he may never return to the verbal spectrum. Arthur refused the chemical sedatives. He demanded an active solution. He flew in a specialized behavioral therapy team from Boston, paying them an emergency retainer of $25,000 a week. They set up cameras. They established rigid routine charts on the walls. They filled the house with high-volume, hyper-cheerful vocal prompts, trying to force Liam out of his shell through sheer sensory input. The result was an absolute disaster. The sudden influx of loud voices and constant physical proximity drove Liam into a state of raw, animalistic panic. He covered his ears with his small hands, sinking to his knees, and let out long, agonizing shrieks that rattled the windows of the West Wing. The screams held no words, no language, only the pure, unadulterated frequency of terror. He scratched at his own arms. He threw a heavy crystal paperweight through a glass cabinet door, sending shards raining across the carpet. The Boston team lasted precisely 6 days before submitting their resignation papers, citing an unmanageable domestic environment. The household staff suffered the same rapid, systematic failure. The mansion required maintenance. The industrial kitchen needed cleaning. The vast corridors had to be swept. But the housekeepers could not navigate the invisible landmines of the Scott family grief. The first maid, hired through a premium domestic agency, lasted 4 days. She attempted to pick up Liam's faded stuffed monkey from the floor to run it through the laundry machine. Liam reacted with instant fury, biting her forearm until she bled. She left the property before her shift concluded. The second maid quit after a week, stating that the absolute, suffocating silence of the corridors gave her chest pains. The third housekeeper was dismissed within 48 hours after she tried to force Liam to sit at the main dining table for breakfast, causing the boy to experience a hyperventilating panic attack that required an emergency house call from a private physician. 7 different housekeepers passed through the massive iron gates of the Scott estate in a single calendar month. 7 went out, their uniform bags packed, their faces pale with exhaustion. The domestic placement agency began to screen Arthur's calls. The estate became known in the industry as a corporate graveyard, a place where money was infinite but human peace was entirely non-existent. Arthur stopped asking for their names. He stopped reviewing the files that his executive assistants placed on his desk. He withdrew into his private glass office on the upper level, looking down at the dark pine forest surrounding his property. He would sit for hours in the dark, drinking bitter espresso, his eyes fixed on the financial monitors that tracked his expanding wealth. His net worth increased by millions every fiscal quarter. His companies acquired 3 new logistics syndicates, but his home remained a tomb. Every evening at midnight, Arthur would walk down the long, silent corridor to Liam's room. He would sit on the edge of the mattress, watching the faint, rhythmic movement of the boy's chest beneath the duvet. He would reach out his large, calloused hand and gently trace the line of his son's jaw, his heart breaking in the darkness. "Just say one thing, Liam," Arthur would whisper into the empty space, his voice rough with tears. "Just look at me. Give me a sign that you're still in there." Liam would only turn his face toward the wall, his small fingers twitching against the fabric of his plush monkey. The boy was physically 3 feet away, but emotionally he was light years across the universe, locked inside a fortress that no amount of billionaire leverage could ever hope to breach. Regina Wilson entered the Scott estate on a gray, rain-slicked Thursday morning. She did not utilize the grand circular driveway. She did not request the security detail to park her vehicle. She arrived via the public transit bus, walking 3/4 of a mile up the steep incline of the hill with a canvas tote bag slung over her shoulder. The estate cook admitted her through the side service entrance, right past the dry goods pantry. She wore a plain, unbranded denim shirt with the sleeves rolled neatly to her elbows, dark trousers, and scuffed leatherwork shoes. Her hair was a dark, rich black, pulled back securely into a tight, flawless bun at the base of her neck. Her face carried no makeup, no jewelry, no pretense. Inside her canvas bag were her own personal cleaning elements: a large block of natural Castile soap, a bottle of clear white vinegar, and a collection of soft cloths made from old, cut-up cotton shirts. She did not ask for an operational manual. She did not ask for a map of the 20-room mansion. Arthur encountered her in the central gallery as he was preparing to leave for the downtown corporate headquarters. He looked down at her from the landing of the grand staircase, his eyes cold, distant, and thoroughly fatigued by the domestic cycle. "The main utility closet is beneath the service stairs," Arthur said, his voice clipped, businesslike, and entirely devoid of expectation. "The West Wing library is my private study. Do not disturb the files on the desk. Perform your tasks without noise. The boy stays in the south parlor. Do not interact with him under any circumstances." Regina raised her head. Her eyes were an unusually deep, dark brown, completely calm and remarkably still. She did not give the rapid, obsequious nod that the previous maids had given. She did not offer a false, nervous smile to please the billionaire. She simply held his gaze for 3 long seconds. It was an unblinking, steady look that felt heavy with an unspoken, old-world dignity. "I understand the parameters, Mr. Scott," she said softly. Her voice was low, carrying a natural, grounded resonance that seemed to absorb the sharp echo of the stone hall. She turned away immediately and went straight to the far end of the eastern corridor. She began with the lower baseboards. She did not use loud industrial vacuums or chemical sprays that left a harsh, synthetic scent in the air. She dipped her cotton cloth into a bucket of warm water, mixed with a few drops of vinegar and Castile soap. She wrung the fabric out until it was precisely damp, then knelt onto the limestone floor. Her movements were executed in deliberate slow motion. Stroke after stroke, she wiped the dark walnut wood, her arm moving with a rhythmic mechanical consistency. She did not rush to finish the haul. She focused entirely on the square foot of wood directly in front of her knees. And as she worked, she began to hum. The sound was faint, low, and anchored deep within her chest. It was a melody without words, an old, traditional spiritual tune that sounded like it had been handed down through generations of rural families. It wasn't loud enough to penetrate the closed doors of the offices, but it vibrated through the structure of the floorboards. The rhythm of the hum matched the steady, back-and-forth movement of her cleaning cloth. Liam was sitting in his perpetual position in the south parlor, his small frame swallowed by a large velvet wingback chair near the tall windows. He was staring out at the heavy fog rolling through the valley, his left arm locking the faded, stuffed monkey against his ribcage. He did not turn his head when Regina entered the far corner of the room. He did not shift his legs. Regina did not acknowledge him. She did not say hello. She did not lower her body to try to catch his eye or use the high-pitched, patronizing tone that the therapist favored. She kept an absolute distance of 15 feet. She began to clean the lower shelves of the mahogany bookcase, her back turned to the boy. But she kept humming that same low, resonant tune. Arthur stood in the shadow of the gallery entrance, his briefcase in his hand, his eyes tracking his son's reaction. He expected the boy to tense up. He expected Liam to drop the monkey and begin the rhythmic headbanging that signaled an oncoming panic attack. Instead, Liam's small ears visibly moved. His rocking cadence, which had been fast and erratic, slowly began to synchronize with the rhythm of Regina's hum. He didn't turn around, but his tiny fingers relaxed their grip on the stuffed monkey's arm. He sat entirely still, his small body absorbing the low, comforting frequency that filled the vast, cold space between the worker and the child. 3 hours passed in total structural stillness. Regina completed the dust extraction from the lower shelves. Before she picked up her bucket to exit the parlor, She performed a quiet, deliberate action. She walked over to an old wicker storage bin in the corner where the old toys were kept. She reached inside and retrieved a small, plush monkey. It was a completely different toy than the one Liam held. It was an older, factory-line item with a torn left ear and a missing button eye. It had belonged to Liam 3 years ago, during the final winter his mother was alive, before the household items were boxed away. Regina did not walk over to Liam's chair. She did not attempt to present it to him like a gift. She simply set the torn toy down on the very edge of the cream-colored carpet, exactly 3 feet from the base of his wingback chair, right where the afternoon light cut through the window. Then, she picked up her red utility bucket and walked out of the room without looking back. The following morning at 7 a.m., Arthur walked into the south parlor to check the security feeds. Liam was sitting in his chair. The new, torn stuffed monkey was resting securely in his right hand. His small thumb was slowly, repeatedly tracing the jagged line of the missing button eye. Regina returned at exactly 8 a.m. She went straight to the kitchen pantry. Without asking the estate cook for permission or guidance, she quietly warmed a small ceramic cup of whole milk on the stove. She carried it down the corridor and placed it on a small wooden step stool near the parlor entrance, right along the path Liam took when he moved toward the garden doors. She didn't wait to see if he noticed. She immediately walked into the formal dining room to begin cleaning the exterior glass panes. By noon, the ceramic cup was completely empty, wiped clean. The torn stuffed monkey had been placed precisely on the center of the step stool, left there like a silent token of exchange, a complex human transaction completed entirely without a single syllable of spoken language. Arthur began to notice a profound shift in the physical reality of the estate. The mansion no longer felt like a corporate installation hiding a tragedy. The air was lighter, smelling faintly of natural soap and clean water rather than industrial solvents. The remaining household staff stopped walking on eggshells. The slammed doors and whispered corporate updates ceased entirely. Regina moved through the rooms like a quiet, functional shadow that radiated absolute safety. She noticed the micro details that the highly paid specialists missed. She noticed that the bright red cushions on the hallway benches caused Liam's eyes to dilate with stress. She quietly moved them into the basement storage locks. She noticed that the sharp, high-pressure hiss of the kitchen water filtration unit caused the boy to lock his jaw. She strictly operated the system at the conclusion of her evening shift when Liam was on the upper floor. She never forced herself into his personal space. She never initiated a physical approach. She simply remained present, steady, and entirely predictable. And slowly, the vulnerable boy who had been buried alive inside a multi-year silence began to turn his face toward her quiet, unshakable light. The memory of the voice kept Arthur awake long after the estate lights had automatically deactivated. "You're okay, Mommy." The phrase was a physical pressure inside his skull. It vibrated with a terrifying, holy clarity. The billionaire sat behind his desk in the dark library, his laptop screen casting a cold, blue illumination across his face. He opened the secure portal to his primary corporate intelligence firm, the agency he utilized to vet international business partners during high-stakes acquisitions. "I need an absolute, unrestricted background profile on Regina Wilson," Arthur directed, his voice low and jagged as he spoke into his encrypted line. "Cross-reference every name change, every out-of-state employment record, and every medical registration filing. Do not stop at the standard civil checks. I want the complete record by dawn." He hung up the phone. He spent the remainder of the night pacing the length of the room, his leather shoes clicking against the walnut floorboards. At 5:45 a.m., a high-priority digital file landed in his secure inbox. Arthur clicked the lock icon and expanded the document. The true profile was dense, heavy, and immediate. Regina Wilson was an alias, legally registered 3 years prior under an out-of-state witness protection and privacy statute. Her birth name was Regina Allen. She was not a career maid. She was a highly qualified, university-educated pediatric nurse who had specialized in severe, nonverbal neurological conditions at a premium private medical clinic in North Carolina. Her evaluation reports were flawless, filled with commendations from senior surgeons. Until the night of November 14th. A 7-year-old boy named Ethan, the son of the state's most prominent real estate tycoon, had been admitted under her direct overnight watch. The child carried an extremely rare, undocumented genetic brain abnormality. At 2 a.m., he experienced a catastrophic, sudden status epilepticus, a continuous, life-threatening seizure that bypassed standard medication controls. The investigation log showed that Regina had executed every medical protocol perfectly. She had initialized the oxygen lines. She had deployed the emergency anticonvulsants. She had dropped her own body onto the hard linoleum floor of the clinic room, cradling the boy's head in her lap for 12 continuous minutes to protect his skull from the metal frame of the bed while the emergency response team scrambled to locate the on-call physician. The child survived the incident, but suffered localized neurological deficit due to the prolonged nature of the seizure. The wealthy family launched a multi-million-dollar lawsuit against the clinic's board of directors, threatening to ruin the institution's public valuation. The administrative suite panicked. They modified the digital access logs, deleted the time-stamped internal communications, and placed the entire burden of negligence on the overnight nurse. Regina was terminated within 24 hours. Her state nursing license was permanently revoked. Her name was placed on a national civil registry for institutional negligence. But the file revealed a far darker human tragedy. Regina had been the sole legal guardian of her 12-year-old younger brother, Samuel, after their parents were killed in an industrial accident years prior. When the clinic terminated her contract and her license was stripped away, her income dropped to zero. The state legal machinery moved against her with terrifying speed. Citing her ongoing legal litigation, her lack of financial resources, and the flagged status of her record, a family court judge declared her unfit to maintain custody. Samuel was removed from her home by court order, placed into a closed adoption system out of state, and Regina was barred from initiating any form of physical or digital contact. She had lost her profession. She had lost her brother. She had lost her entire place in the world. She had chosen to completely erase her history, taking a legal name change and descending into the invisible world of commercial cleaning agencies, a sanctuary where no one asked for credentials, and where her quiet demeanor was seen as a standard asset rather than a cover for a profound, bleeding scar. Arthur closed the laptop with a slow, heavy motion. The dark library felt incredibly small, suffocatingly tight. He felt a sudden, crushing wave of internal shame. He had spent weeks treating this woman like a disposable corporate unit, a simple functionary hired to clean his countertops. In reality, she was a master healer who was carrying an immense weight of injustice without a single word of complaint. At 7 p.m. that evening, the main house was quiet. The primary kitchen staff had departed. Regina was in the central kitchen, using a dry microfiber cloth to wipe the polished marble surfaces of the island. Arthur walked into the room, his movements slow, his arms resting at his sides. He did not remain on the stairs. He walked straight up to the marble counter, stopping 2 feet away from her. "I received the North Carolina file today, Regina," Arthur said softly. His voice lacked any trace of his corporate edge. It was rough, low, and entirely grounded. "I know about the clinic. I know about Ethan. And I know what the system did to your brother, Samuel." Regina's hand stopped moving instantly. The cloth remained pressed flat against the marble. She did not flinch. She did not let out a dramatic gasp. She kept her head bowed for 5 long seconds, her breathing steady but incredibly shallow. When she finally raised her face, her eyes were bright, glassy with tears, but her jaw was set like dark granite. "Are you calling the placement agency to replace me, Mr. Scott?" she asked quietly. Her voice was a level whisper that carried no fear, only a calm, heavy acceptance of the world's standard pattern. "Why didn't you fight them?" Arthur asked, ignoring her question entirely, his eyes fixed on her rough, soap-burned hands. "I know the structure of those medical boards. With the right legal representation, you could have broken their defense in 3 months. The people who run those clinics don't look for the truth, Mr. Scott," Regina said, her voice remaining perfectly level as she looked back down at the marble. "They look for a name to put on the public incident report so their stock value doesn't drop the next morning. When a multi-billion-dollar system decides that you are the liability, your facts don't matter anymore. Your words just become noise. I didn't want to spend my life screaming into a wind that didn't care. I just wanted to find a place where I could clean up the dirt and be useful without anyone asking me to explain my scars. My son spoke to you yesterday," Arthur said, his voice dropping into a rough register, trembling with the weight of the miracle. "He looked you in the eyes. He called you Mommy." Regina looked directly into the billionaire's eyes, a single, clear tear finally escaping her lid and tracing a path down her cheek. "He didn't read my legal file, Mr. Scott, and he didn't care about my revoked license. He just recognized someone who knew exactly what it felt like to be trapped inside a room where you're screaming at the top of your lungs, but no one can hear a single sound. I wasn't trying to take your wife's place. I would never do that. I was just helping him hold the weight of the dark until he was strong enough to stand up." Arthur looked down at her hands, then back to her calm, unshakable face. He stood there in his custom suit, surrounded by his multi-million-dollar estate, completely silent and profoundly humbled in front of his housekeeper. The fragile peace that had begun to settle over the Scott estate was violently dismantled 2 days later. Arthur was in the middle of a high-stakes municipal acquisition meeting downtown when his private security terminal flashed a high-priority red notification. He connected the line instantly. It was his chief of compound security, his voice urgent and tight. "Mr. Scott, you need to return to the property immediately," the chief stated. "We have 2 field agents from Estate Child Protective Services at the front doors. They arrived with a formal civil order. Someone filed an anonymous tracking report alleging that an uncertified adult with a flagged out-of-state institutional record is operating in an unsupervised caretaking capacity near your son." Arthur left the boardroom without providing an explanation to his partners. He drove his vehicle up the winding hill at a dangerous, breakneck pace, the tires throwing up gravel as he cleared the main security gates. When he slammed through the heavy oak front doors of the mansion, he found the 2 state caseworkers sitting at the long mahogany dining table. They had deployed their official badges, their laptops, and 2 thick manila folders. Regina was standing quietly against the far wall of the dining room, her hands folded in front of her denim shirt, her head lowered. Liam was standing directly behind her, his small fingers locking into the fabric of her trousers, his face buried against her leg while he clutched his stuffed monkey like a shield. "Mr. Scott," the lead caseworker said, rising from her chair with a professional, unyielding posture. "We received a detailed administrative tip regarding the individual operating as your household manager under the name Regina Wilson. Her verified profile indicates an unresolved case of systemic medical negligence involving a minor in North Carolina. Given your son's documented nonverbal autism and extreme vulnerability, state protocol dictates that she must be removed from the property immediately pending a formal administrative inquiry. She is barred from maintaining physical proximity to the child. She didn't neglect anyone." Arthur roared, his voice exploding off the high timber ceilings, his fists clenching at his sides. "The North Carolina clinic fabricated the data to protect their venture capital valuation. I have the security team reviewing the files now. That is a matter for a civil court review, Mr. Scott," the caseworker stated, her tone entirely mechanical, checked by the absolute rigidity of state bureaucracy. "But as of this hour, she does not possess the legal clearance to remain in this household near a vulnerable minor. If you attempt to obstruct this transition, we will be forced to file a non-compliance order against your own parental custody status." Regina moved with absolute, calm deliberation. She reached down and gently, slowly uncurled Liam's small, frantic fingers from the fabric of her trousers. She dropped her knees onto the hardwood floor until she was at exact eye level with the terrified boy. "I need to take my canvas bag and step outside for a little while, Liam," she said softly. Her voice was a perfect, unshakable island of safety in the center of the room's hostility. "But you have your monkey, and your father is standing right here in the room. He is very strong, and he is not going to let anything happen to your parlor. You are safe." Liam didn't understand the legal mechanisms of the state, but his eyes locked onto the canvas bag she was lifting from the floor. He saw her reaching for her coat. He recognized the pattern of the door opening. A sudden, high-pitched shriek tore from the boy's throat. It was a raw, animalistic sound, the frequency of an absolute human soul being ripped apart in the dark. He dropped to his knees on the limestone floor. He began to kick his small legs, his fingernails clawing frantically at the polished wood, leaving long white scratch marks in the dark walnut stain. "Mommy!" Liam screamed, his voice cracking, expanding with an agonizing, clear pronunciation that shook the glass light fixtures overhead. "Mommy, stay. Stay. Don't go." Regina closed her eyes tightly, her shoulders shaking with a sudden, silent sob, but she did not look back. She stepped through the front door, the two state caseworkers following close behind her heels. The massive oak door swung shut, closing with a heavy, final, booming click that echoed through the entire 20-room house. The regression was immediate. It was absolute. Liam refused to move from the exact square foot of floor where Regina had left him. He curled his small body into a tight, defensive fetal ball. He refused to allow Arthur to touch him. When Arthur attempted to gently lift him from the hardwood, Liam lashed out with frantic, terrified strength, his nails scratching his father's forearm, leaving 3 long, red lines of blood across the billionaire's skin. He refused to look at the playroom. He refused to drink the warm milk. For 3 continuous days, the Scott estate returned to a state of absolute domestic warfare. Liam did not sleep. He sat on the floor by the south parlor window, his eyes wide and bloodshot, staring out at the empty gravel driveway. He rocked back and forth, with an erratic, violent cadence, his forehead repeatedly bumping against the double-pane glass until Arthur had to place pillows against the wall to protect his skull. Arthur sat on the lower landing of the grand staircase, his head down in his hands, the bloody scratches on his arm uncovered. His billions were completely useless. His global systems were an absolute joke. His house was filled once more with the raw, shape-of-loss screams of a child who had been pulled back into the absolute dark after finally seeing the light. Arthur looked up at the dark ceilings, his jaw tightening into a hard, unbreakable line of resolve. He was done playing by the parameters of the system. He was going to fight. Arthur did not utilize his wealth to negotiate with the State Department. He utilized it to physically dismantle the lie that had broken Regina's life. He mobilized his primary corporate litigation team, a group of the highest-paid defense attorneys in the corporate sector, and paired them with an elite private intelligence syndicate. He gave them 48 hours of continuous funding. They flew a private transport to North Carolina. They tracked down the former night nurse who had written the original suppressed validation letter. They located the low-level data technician who had been forced to alter the digital timestamps on the night of Ethan's seizure. At 2 a.m. on a Monday morning, Arthur's legal team cornered the former clinic administrator at his private residence. They laid a document on his table, a comprehensive civil fraud indictment backed by forensic server data that would carry a minimum 20-year federal prison sentence. They gave him a simple, binary choice: sign the absolute confession of institutional tampering or face immediate arrest when the courts opened at dawn. The administrator signed the confession. By 9 a.m., Arthur was standing inside the office of the Director of State Child Protective Services. He did not request an appointment. He walked past the assistants, slamming the North Carolina forensic file, the signed administrative confession, and an immediate state nursing board reinstatement order onto the center of the desk. The registry entry against Regina Vance is completely fraudulent, and the state board has officially cleared her record, Arthur said, his voice dropping into a low, terrifying growl that left the director entirely speechless. The anonymous tip sent to your department was routed through a proxy server controlled by the clinic's remaining holding company. If you do not sign the absolute dismissal of the inquiry against my household within 60 seconds, my legal teams will file a $20 million civil rights suit against this department before noon. Sign the paper. The director signed the dismissal. Arthur drove his own vehicle down to the industrial city district, stopping in front of a gray, weathered apartment block where Regina was staying in a short-term rental unit. He walked up the concrete stairs and knocked firmly on the door. When Regina opened it, her face looked profoundly tired, her eyes flat, as if she had finally accepted her permanent status as an outsider. Arthur did not deliver a lengthy corporate speech. He simply held out the official document bearing the gold seal of the state registry. "Your record is completely clean, Regina," Arthur said, his voice thick, rough with an unforced emotion. "The National Board has reinstated your pediatric nursing license with full honors. The North Carolina clinic administrators are currently under federal indictment for systematic fraud. You are entirely clear. The system is broken, but the truth is out. Come home." Regina stared at the document, her rough fingers slowly tracing the embossed gold seal. She looked up into the billionaire's face, her voice a faint whisper. "Why did you go to this length for a housekeeper, Mr. Scott?" "Because you saved my son's heart," Arthur said, his eyes burning with absolute clarity. "And because a house without you isn't a home anymore." Liam is waiting by the window. The drive back up the coastal hill was completed in profound, reverent silence. As the SUV cleared the iron gates, the late afternoon sun broke through the gray fog, casting a deep, golden warmth over the stone framework of the mansion. Regina stepped through the side entrance, carrying her old canvas bag. She did not make a dramatic announcement to the staff. She walked straight into the kitchen pantry, warmed a fresh cup of whole milk on the stove, and walked slowly into the south parlor. Liam was sitting on the floor by the window, his frame looking dangerously small, his face stained with 3 days of salt and dust. His stuffed monkey was resting limply in his lap. Regina did not rush her approach. She placed the ceramic cup on the small wooden stool. Then, she quietly dropped her knees onto the cream carpet, pulled her yellow rubber cleaning gloves high onto her arms, and began to hum that low, resonant, familiar spiritual melody. Liam's entire body went rigid. He did not look up immediately. He sat perfectly still for 3 long seconds, his ears absorbing the steady, predictable anchor of her chest hum. Slowly, the boy turned his head. His wide brown eyes locked onto her face. His small lips parted, trembling violently. He did not crawl. He stood up on his feet and ran with explosive, unbridled speed across the carpet. He threw his small body directly into her lap, burying his face deep into the denim fabric of her shirt, his small arms locking around her neck with every ounce of strength he possessed. "I stayed, Liam," Regina whispered into his dark hair, her own tears finally spilling over her cheeks as she held him tight against her chest. "I stayed. You're okay. The dark is gone." Arthur stood in the deep shadow of the doorway, his hand resting on the brass knob, watching the 2 human souls hold each other in the quiet room. He did not cross the threshold. He did not attempt to claim a share of the moment. He simply stood there, the billionaire who had built systems to solve the world's problems, finally realizing that the greatest system ever engineered was the quiet layout of human grace. The silence inside the Scott estate was completely gone, but hadn't been replaced by the loud, corporate noise of the world. It had been replaced by a home, a safe, steady sanctuary built on a floor of stone, held together by a father who learned how to stay, a boy who found his voice, and a healer who had finally found her way back to the light.